This past weekend, we saw a story from many outlets that said Andy Ngo reportedly attacked in Portland. And they said reportedly because they weren't sure the man who was attacked was actually Andy Ngo. For those that aren't familiar, Andy is a journalist who covers Antifa fairly extensively, and he wrote a book about it, which I believe was like a #1 bestseller on Amazon. We're now learning officially, following a statement publicly from Andy Ngo 5 days after the attack, that it was in fact him. That he went down and infiltrated this Antifa protest. He got exposed, they beat him and chased him. There's a lot that needs to be said about this, and there's a lot that needs to be, in a sense, sort of exposed, or I should say the situation exposes the problems of tribalism. Now, obviously, first and foremost, Andy should not have been attacked. Antifa is a fringe extremist organization of lunatics that often get protected by the media. Journalists don't care to actually report the truth, don't stick around to cover what Antifa is doing. Almost nobody is willing to do it. And Andy Ngo is one of the few that's willing to do it. And for this, they have physically beaten him now on more than one occasion. But I'll tell you, first, I want to read this story from Willamette Week. They're a fairly biased source, but they actually do, strangely, in a sense, defend Andy. And then I want to read for you his statement. But I want to point out something. I want to point out something that really, really bothers me. And then I'm going to give you my opinion on reporting and how I feel about Andy. Of course, many of you may have seen my tweets, and a lot of people are like, "That's a bad take, Tim." Look, my take's not bad. I'm right. I understand how these things work, and I'll break it down for you. But I want to show you the news first to give you the context. But I want to point something out. When this story broke, and they were saying Andy Ngo reportedly was attacked. I'll let you in, all of you. Let me let you in on a big secret. A bunch of people knew for a fact that it was Andy Ngo and said nothing. They held their tongues. I didn't know. I genuinely did not know if that was Andy or not. And I thought it would make no sense to be Andy because there's no upside for him to actually go and do something like this. I know a lot of people are like, he's a journalist, he has to cover it. It was a relatively small, run-of-the-mill Antifa protest in Portland. It wasn't a major yearly event. And maybe Andy just doesn't realize that he is an international level reporter who doesn't need to be covering local protests. I understand, though, with Portland, you've got this ongoing problem and you want to be there to document it. I get that. So I didn't believe it was him. And then I'll get into all that, stuff about reporting and conflict and security. But a lot of people on the right knew the details, said nothing. And I'm wondering to myself, why didn't you just confirm what you knew? Why is it that so many of these people would go on Twitter and say these things when many of them knew it was him? And it wasn't until just around the time that Andy put out a statement that I learned that several people knew the whole time that Andy did this. I'm just genuinely confused. If he did this, it happened, it should be reported. People should be told it was Andy. Why were people refraining from reporting the news that Andy did this? I think tribalism is the big reason. I think people are more concerned with winning for their side and less concerned with the truth. I'll tell you what I'm concerned with. Knowing what's going on, having a clear understanding, and standing up for my principles. But let me read for you the story and break it down, and then I'll show you Andy Ngo's statement. So Willamette Week, obviously a biased source. They once made a derogatory comment about me, to which they were forced to correct, and then still didn't want to. But there's a really important point in here which defends Andy, which I want people to see. They say 5 days after attack, Andy Ngo releases statement confirming he was chased and beaten in Portland. Ngo closed his statement with an appeal to Portland's police and other journalists for support. They say, in a thread on Twitter, in a statement released to Willamette Week, Ngo gave his account of the assault, which occurred when demonstrators recognized him in disguise at a rally on the 1-year anniversary of this city's George Floyd protest. Quote, "I was chased, attacked, and beaten by a masked mob baying for my blood," Ngo wrote. "Had I not been able to shelter, wounded and bleeding inside a hotel while they beat the doors and windows like animals, there is no doubt in my mind I would not be here today." Ngo's account lines up with much of what Willamette Week reported that night. Though Ngo's identity was unconfirmed, approximately 10 people split off from the larger protest to follow Ngo and question him about his identity. They chased Ngo for blocks before tackling him and punching him several times after his head hit the brick sidewalk of Southwest Morrison Street. I was actually surprised that Willamette Week noted these things, that not only did they beat Andy, but his head hit the brick sidewalk. I mean, it sounds like they're actually making Antifa look bad. Antifa is bad. Antifa organizations exist. Many on the left don't know this because the media doesn't report it. The left then uses smear tactics to insult and deride and poison the well, as it were, with reporting from people like Andy Ngo. So what happens is there was a viral video I brought up on the when I reported this when it was unconfirmed about a random Asian guy being screamed at. Andy is so famous among Antifa, so discredited by the propagandists that they don't even know what he looks like. They scream at random Asian men. They must discredit him because he's one of the few that actually is going after Antifa very hard. They say after Ngo broke free from the people hitting him, he fled through the high-end hotel near Pioneer Courthouse Square, where his pursuers tried to wrest open the front doors and called for him to meet them outside. An image on his social media thread tonight shows bruises, cuts, and a bloodied eye. He says he went to the hospital shortly after the attack. Ngo closed his statement with an appeal to Portland's police and other journalists for support. Quote, I call on the Portland police and federal authorities to act on this before Antifa operatives hiding behind their masks succeed in murdering an American journalist on their watch. And I call on journalists and all those who believe in the First Amendment to join me in standing against the tyranny of those who use violence to terrorize, silence, and suppress truth. This is the second time in 3 years that protesters have attacked Ngo, whom they consider a threat to their safety because he regularly posts their mugshots and personal information to social media following their arrests. Ngo says he ventured back into the crowd while reporting a new chapter for his book, Unmasked, Inside Antifa's Radical Plan to Destroy Democracy. And Willamette Week notes, this is normal. This is a very important point. Publishers often ask for follow-up chapters to bestsellers. Andy Ngo wasn't randomly going out there, and so perhaps there was a good reason for him to be there, and I'll stand corrected on that statement when I said what was the purpose of him being on the ground. That's why I didn't believe he would be there, and I tweeted that. But as they note, he was writing a chapter for his book, which is a bestseller, and publishers often do ask for follow-up chapters. It doesn't change my opinion on the whole, but I'm willing to recognize that I understand the goal in going down. That I understand, and I can stand corrected in that regard. Police arrested one person shortly after arriving at the Nines, the hotel where Andy was hiding, but a probable cause affidavit shows that person's arrest was unrelated to the attack on Ngo. The 26-year-old protester was arrested on suspicion of breaking a Starbucks window with a rock 1 month prior. Wow. The Portland police did close the intersection of Southwest Morrison and 6th Avenue. Their perimeter appeared to be related to the arrest they made. They didn't interfere with the people pursuing Ngo as they yelled at hotel staff. Ngo tweeted his threat approximately 10 minutes before appearing on the Fox News talk show, The Ingram Angle, in his first media appearance since the attack. Okay. So I'll point out the obvious. When they mentioned that Andy Ngo tweeted his thread about 10 minutes before appearing on Laura Ingram, that means Andy Ngo reached out to journalists and was talking with them. Many people knew this was Andy Ngo. I'm not a fan of this. I think he should have issued a statement immediately. I'm a fan of people knowing the truth. And there were many conservative reporters who did not report this because they wanted to give Andy the opportunity to do what he needed to do or whatever it is he wished. Sure. I don't consider that journalism. I mean, I guess you can. There's a bunch of different kinds of journalism. There's advocacy journalism and there's tribalist journalism. Now, in Andy's thread, much of which was already published by Willamette Week, he says that, no journalist should ever face violence doing his or her job. Yet on Friday, May 28th, Antifa tried to kill me again while I was reporting on the ongoing protests and riots in Portland, Oregon for a new chapter of my book. I was chased, attacked, and beaten by a masked mob, baying for my blood. Had I not been able to shelter wounded and bleeding inside a hotel while they beat the doors, there's no doubt in my mind I would not be here. He says Antifa wants me dead because I document what they want to stay hidden. The attacks against me and threats on my life are retribution for my work as a journalist, recording the tactics and true ideology of an extremist clandestine movement that relies on deception and regards the truth as the greatest threat of all. They want the right to hide their identities behind masks and erase records of their arrest and alleged crimes. They want me dead for capturing these things and reporting them. But it is the right of every journalist, protected and preserved by the founding fathers, to report freely without fear. I was forced to flee my home in Portland last year as the death threats escalated, but returned recently to take care of my elderly family. When I engaged in field reporting for my book, I did what every beat reporter would do. I took care to mitigate the risks and went to observe Antifa firsthand during a demonstration at the Justice Center. Like many other journalists, Antifa has tried to silence and intimidate through violence and threats. I had to cover my face and eyes to do my job and stay alive. As the Asian son of Vietnamese immigrants, I also have to be mindful of Antifa's attacks on multiple people of East Asian origin, probably under the assumption that these individuals were Andy No. He says, shortly before midnight, Antifa member John Hacker, who assaulted me in 2019, began asking me questions. I didn't answer and attempted to walk away, but a group of masked people in black followed and surrounded me. As they interrogated me, one managed to pull off my mask and immediately yelled, "That's Andy, get him, get him." As I sprinted through downtown Portland trying to flag down help, there was no visible police presence. At Southwest 4th Avenue and Southwest Morrison, one of the black-clad Antifa members tackled me to the ground in front of Pioneer Place Mall, punching my head and face repeatedly, while I pleaded for them not to kill me. All the time, I could hear the angry cries and footsteps of the mob approaching. In the chaos, I managed to seize a moment when my attackers were distracted and crawled away. As soon as I could get to my feet, I sprinted inside the only business I could see that was open, the Nines Hotel. I begged hotel staff to call 911, but they refused and ordered me to wear a mask and leave the property. I insisted, reminding them of the violent mob outside seeking to kill me. By now, masked Antifa operatives were pounding on the doors outside and windows, screaming and shouting my name. It seemed obvious they intended to make good on the hundreds of threats over the past 2 years to kill me, and they have made these threats many times. As you can see in these photos he posted, it says murder Andy No and kill Andy No. Afraid the windows would shatter and let the mob in, I begged someone to let me go up the elevator to escape from the lobby. For more than an hour, Antifa extremists kept trying to get into the hotel to hunt me down and finish the job they started on the street. Dozens of riot police took up positions in front of the building, where at least one online video shows extremists swearing and screaming at officers for protecting Andy No. At least one Antifa member was arrested, according to the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office, charged with felony unlawful use of a weapon, felony attempted assault, felony riot, and other crimes. His bail was immediately covered by an Antifa bail fund group. Now, as Willamette Week reported, assuming you trust them, this was unrelated. I think that's an important point. It shows the police were not going to help Andy. It shows the hotel did not want to help Andy. He says, later I was escorted to an ambulance by a medic from Portland Fire and Rescue through a back entrance of the hotel. When Antifa last beat me for doing my job in 2019, doctors told me I could have died from the brain hemorrhage caused by the blows to my head. I have made more than 24 reports of subsequent threats and attacks to the Portland police. And as far as I'm aware, no action has been taken. After the 2019 assault, Antifa and their sympathizers sought to cast me as a liar, white supremacist, and far-right agitator who deserved to be beaten. These lies will be used again to try to discredit me and other journalists reporting on Antifa and distort the facts. But there's only one truth. I call on Portland police and federal authorities to act on this before Antifa operatives hiding behind their masks succeed in murdering an American journalist on their watch. And I call on journalists and those who believe in the First Amendment to join me in standing against the tyranny of those who use violence to terrorize, silence, and suppress the truth. He then mentions quotes from Libby Emmons, Douglas K. Murray, Jason Rantz, Coey Show, and Abigail Schreier. And Blair White as the first response, I'm confused. How could Antifa assault you if it's just an idea? All right. Now, I wanted to make sure I got through the factual information before I get into my opinion, which many conservatives and people on the right are not fans of. But I'm right. So I'm willing to stand corrected in saying, what was the purpose served by trying to infiltrate Antifa? Perhaps in to Andy, there was a purpose. He's trying to write a new chapter as a follow-up, which is a normal thing. I wasn't familiar with that, so I understand there was a function in being there on the ground. However, I completely disagree with Andy having done this. As I stated in the video I released prior, my opinion should be very, very obvious on this one to everyone. But let me just point out, my goal in reading the story from Willamette Week, which is left biased, and then the statement itself from Andy, was to make sure you had the information first and foremost, and now I can tell you what I think about it. In my video last week, I said, there's no good reason for Andy to go on the ground. He's got 853,000 Twitter followers. He has a #1 best-selling book, and he is better served being a leader for this kind of coverage than being a beat reporter, which is typically an entry-level position. Now, perhaps Andy, it's that being said, it doesn't mean he can't do it. You know, just because you should be leading the charge and running the organization that's investigating this stuff doesn't mean you can't yourself go on the ground. But there's so much to go through. I put up an Instagram video about this. First and foremost, there's a reason why I don't go on the ground anymore. And a lot of people are like, Tim's just jealous because he's a coward and he won't go and report. What purpose would be served if I went to Portland and started live streaming? People are like, why doesn't Tim live stream anymore? Well, for one, it's been 10 years since I started live streaming. And with most journalists who have covered conflict and things like this, I shouldn't say most, but many, they move on to other beats for very obvious reasons. Now, I'm not going to call out anybody. Many of the journalists who knew it was Andy and didn't publish it, I completely disagree with. Had I known and had confirmation it was Andy, I would have said it immediately. Because you deserve to know whether it was truly him or not. I'm not going to cover for anyone, regardless of whether on the right or the left, whether Antifa is good or bad or otherwise. It's about the truth. But there are many journalists I know and respect who cover things on the ground who have said in no uncertain terms, I know I can't do this forever. Many of them go on the ground in disguise, knowing that they will be attacked. But Andy No has 80 times the followers they do. He is the number one target for Antifa. If you wanted to write a new chapter of his book, he need only hire someone who they've never seen before to go down and film this stuff. At a certain point, you have to recognize that. So when I started going on the ground, I actually pushed it a bit hard, in my opinion. I went down and covered Occupy Wall Street, and I was attacked by far leftists. And for 8 or 9 years, I did not stop reporting. Why? Because it was a fringe group, few and far between, who were attacking me. Even though I consistently called them out, they were a fringe element. As the fringe element started to grow and become more and more prominent, and I started to get harassed more and more on the ground, and it turned into, instead of me going somewhere and saying, here's group A and here's group B and here's what happened. Antifa threw a brick. The people on the right-wing group are holding shields. The people on the left, the Antifa, are holding crowbars. It turned into people running up to me and saying, yo, Tim, nice to meet you. It turned into people running up to me and saying, F you, I'm going to beat you up. It turned into people focusing on me being there, which inhibited my ability to tell you what was happening. What's the purpose of journalism? The goal is to show you what's happening so you can better understand it. If I go down to an event and it causes a dramatic ripple effect that changes the circumstances, what am I showing other than I'm going down and having a big impact on an event? So why should Andy be on the ground? Okay, well, first and foremost, again, as I stated before, he's allowed to do it. He shouldn't be attacked. But I want to show you some of the responses. I want to show you a couple responses, and I'll answer them directly. Caitlin Bennett. So here's what I tweeted. What purpose was served by trying to infiltrate Antifa? Now, I mean, legitimate question. I understand Andy's official statement is he was writing a new chapter of his book. Okay, I can accept Andy's perspective on that one. My opinion is still, I don't get it. What chapter on your book are you going to write? You've already been on the ground. You've already covered Antifa extensively. This was not a large substantive protest. It was a run-of-the-mill Portland event that we've seen before. What were you going to write by being there infiltrating Antifa that you didn't already have access to? Steven Crowder already infiltrated these groups. You've already heard them call for extreme violence. This particular protest, I have other conservative journalists saying to me on Facebook, like, yeah, it was actually really small. It wasn't that big. I'm like, so why is he covering local news? Okay, fine. He's allowed to do it. But I don't see how he was going to gain anything substantive for his book. Maybe there's something I don't understand. I mentioned some journalists can't cover certain topics. Women were barred from reporting from Tahrir Square by some outlets due to violence against women specifically. This was pointless and unbelievably stupid. There was a story that I covered, and many people seem to like the video. It's amazing. 99% thumbs up. A Vice reporter wanted to go to an Algerian soccer match. She was warned they will very seriously abuse you as a woman, and you cannot go to a soccer match. It's not legal. Or I should say, I don't know if it was law, but it was like cultural norm. You can't do it. And she said, I'm going to go do it anyway. And she did. And she got physically attacked. Bad. And she sued Vice, saying it's their fault. Do people think they can just literally go wherever they want and do whatever they want? I understand you think she should have been able to do it. Women's rights, hurrah, feminism. But there's a reality to contend with. What purpose was served by her being there? If you're a target and you go somewhere, you are not telling us what these people are doing. You're telling us what these people are doing to you. I understand Andy was in disguise, but they're looking for him. They're always looking for him. Caitlin Bennett with the hot take, quote, "She shouldn't have been wearing a skirt and walking down that alley at night." Now, I understand the purpose of that statement, to imply that it's victim blaming, to say Andy shouldn't have been showing up. I don't know if Caitlin knows who I am, but I'm not a woke leftist. Yes, the woman should not have been wearing a skirt and walking down a dark alley at night. She should be able to. I blame the criminal if she gets attacked, but personal responsibility exists. If you walk up to an ATM machine at 3 a.m. with some shady guy lurking around and you're not paying attention and you get attacked, I'll be like, these things happen. Take responsibility. I love it. I talk about that story from Vice and I have everyone saying, yup, she should have known better. Why would she go and do this? It is the leftist talking point that reality doesn't exist. It is the leftist talking point that women can just do whatever they want whenever they want. It's the leftist talking point when they say men should just stop attacking women. Yeah, they should. But so long as these things exist in reality and criminals exist and violent criminals exist, at what point do we say you have responsibility for your safety? So I can say that Andy shouldn't have been attacked. He did wear a disguise. I understand that. I just think it's reckless, irresponsible, and he goes on Fox News. I'm not a fan. I'm just absolutely not a fan. Because now the story is Andy. Andy's not really exposing Antifa in this regard because he's already written the book about them. We already know they do this, and this protest was not particularly prominent. It was just another run-of-the-mill garbage protest from Portland. And we have numerous stories coming out, even from the Washington Post, saying that violent elements of the far left are taking over the social justice movement. This only creates a spectacle and distracts from what's happening. Andy could have hired very easily a freelance reporter who would go down, wear the disguise, and they wouldn't know who this person was. I know many people who do this, and there are many reporters who stopped covering this because they become the story. Andy can do whatever he wants, but don't expect me to come out and defend journalists who ignore the risks and ignore the dangers, and then the story becomes about them. I complained all day and night when I was at Vice about them sending me out with reporters who had no idea what they were doing. But I'll give you a few examples. What if, James O'Keefe, how many times has James gone and done undercover reporting in the past several years? He doesn't, because he's recognizable, because they're looking for him. To be effective, he pushed the organization, he hired people, and he's doing tremendous work, and he's fighting back. It's high time Andy do the same thing. He can still report, he can still aggregate, he can still be your hub for information on this fringe element group, and he can still write about it without being there physically, risking his life and tainting the story. I'll give you another example. Imagine somebody who is filming a house fire. There's a big difference between filming that house fire, telling people what's going on, and walking into the building and filming it. We'd probably say at that point, you shouldn't do that. I get it's not a perfect analogy, but I don't think Andy is helping anybody by risking his life in this way. Imagine if Andy got killed. Imagine if they did, because we know they want to do it. Then who would run his account and write his stories and expose them? A lot of people are saying he's the best journalist, one of the only people willing to cover them. That's true. I can respect that. So why would he risk his life? These are questions I've asked myself, and it's why I don't go on the ground anymore. I was talking to many people and I said, I would rather just go around filming things. It's becoming a problem because people on the left and the right are getting up in my face for a variety of reasons. And someone said to me, bro, I think the last time I went somewhere, they were like, if you die, then everything you're doing and all the work you're doing, and it's gone. So the question then becomes, now that I'm getting, I think we're hitting around 50 million views per month across my channels, or maybe more. It was like 120 million last election cycle. What if I decided not to do these things and decided instead to go on the ground? No, I think a lot of people would be upset by that. A lot of people are like, you got to keep doing this. You've got to do this work. I accept that. A lot of people are like, Tim should get back to being on the ground. Okay, substantially less effective in reporting when I was on the ground, but it was good reporting. I can respect it, and thank you for the compliments. At a certain point, the risk was so great, I said, I can better serve the people who need good journalism by running the organization. So now we're expanding. and we're close to launching the news site with a newsroom. We're looking to hire journalists. We're looking to hire people who won't change the story by being there, who won't impact the story, won't be a risk to themselves, and can get the story out without being discovered. I got a tweet from Elijah Schaefer I want to address as well. In response to what I said, Elijah said, what purpose was served? He is an active journalist and author documenting activities of Antifa activists on public property. That's his job. He was discreet and simply documenting. A physical presence does not equate agitation. They targeted him, and that's tribal spectacle, WTF? Yes. First of all, I didn't say he was agitating. I said, Andy Ngo is the literal number one target for Antifa. And at their events, they are actively looking for him and other infiltrators. The risk was beyond any reasonable reason to be down there. That's it, period. They've attacked random Asian people trying to find Andy. What do you think? He's an active journalist and author documenting activities on Antifa activists on public property. Yes. Could you imagine if Tucker Carlson, who used to report on the ground in the Middle East, decided he was going to go and do it? It's absurd. No, you guys like Tucker Carlson now being in a sense, a commentator and investigative reporter. And he is. He may not be I'm not saying 90% of his work is investigations, but he's one of the few people calling out what needs to be called out, actually doing groundwork with his team. You'd think it was insane if Tucker said, I'm going to go back to the Middle East and report in Syria. That's absurd. Some people do it. At a certain point, you're too well known. You're risking yourself. You're changing the story. You are not doing journalism. Now, I think the only real criticism it comes down to is, okay, maybe I stand by my statement. It was unbelievably stupid, but perhaps naive is a better word. Perhaps Andy now needs to recognize that with a best-selling book and whatever resources he's acquired from doing this job, he needs to be leading the charge and not being the person on the ground. If he loses his life, then you will lose all of his coverage. That's why it was unbelievably stupid. I think it was reckless and irresponsible. And maybe Andy should start a 501c3 organization that tracks far left extremism, because there's only a few. And yet the left, way better at this. I've asked a bunch of my right-wing reporter friends, a bunch of the conservatives, and I said, if you agree with Andy and you think that he was doing a good job being there, why don't you go down and do it? I'm not trying to say that as a gotcha. I'm saying, no, quite literally. I know many people who used to be on the ground as well, and they stopped going. And they stopped going because they were getting attacked. And it became impractical for them to report because instead of actually reporting, they were filming people swinging at them. And I said, so go back and do it. Oh, no, I'd get attacked. Right. So that's it. Andy does a good job. This was not a good job. That's it. I'm not going to sit here and pander for tribalistic points. I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh man, geez. So many people are coming out right now and just defending Andy. And I'll tell you this. I'm not going to call out people by name, but there certainly are a lot of people who knew it was him and are giving him some kind of tribal benefit. I don't play those games. If someone comes to me and reports and knows things, I think the truth is what matters. And I think people should realize that. And I've mentioned this years ago and in the past year, and I always do. Occupy Wall Street, those leftists loved me because I was reporting on what was going on, and it was typically the police acting a fool. Later on, when I started documenting the far left, the extremists, and they started becoming more prominent, they started getting mad at me, saying, oh no, Tim's filming us now. And they told me, Tim, don't film us. Only film the police. And I said, no, I'm going to tell people what's actually happening. I'm not going to do anything for you or anyone else. The truth is what's important. Now, I understand the left doesn't play by the rules, and I've pointed this out. It's a challenge. If they're cheating, how do we win? Well, we need to be smart, tactful, strategic, resourceful. If Andy wants to go on the ground, he can do a couple things. If he wants reporting from the ground, one, hire someone else to do it, or just get security. Lots of journalists go on the ground. They bring security guards with them. The problem is, if Andy showed up with security, it would create a ripple effect which would change what's happening. Now, a lot of people are saying this exposed Antifa, but let me just make it very clear for you guys. When you're talking about persuasion and trying to inform regular people of what Antifa is, did this serve a purpose? No. Does it help your cause? No, it doesn't. You can come out and say Andy was attacked, and now people are going to be like, the guy who had attacked you a couple years ago Doesn't he know they'll do this? Why would he go and do it again? And the accusation now and the fuel being used by the left is that Andy did it on purpose. Now, I'm not saying that, but I'll just tell you. If you want to convince regular people, you need a candid lens showing them doing it. I understand Andy was disguised. He clearly wasn't prepared for this, didn't have a plan, and had no security, because you can even have security in disguise. What needs to happen is the right needs to get better. The left is really good at this. The right is really bad at this. And because of it now, this just makes the right look bad. That's it. I have done a ton of reporting. I have witnessed very extreme events. I reported from Thailand. And after my documentary came out that made very powerful people look very bad, I was told, you can't come back to this country. I went to Venezuela and I was forced to flee because they made me the story. And Vice, when I talked to them on the phone, I said, we need to leave. They are tweeting about me. It's broken the story and it's dangerous. And they said, can't you make this the story? That's what I was told by Vice. And I said, no. And I left Venezuela. And I came back to the U.S. because I can't tell people what's going on if I'm just telling them what's happening to me. That's just me, though. You don't got to agree with my opinion. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 1 p.m. on this channel. Thanks for hanging out. And in all sincerity, look, I wish Andy Ngo the best, obviously. I think he does good work. He wrote a very prominent book. You can buy it. It's look up Andy Ngo's book on Amazon. I think it was #1. And we need his reporting because very few are willing to do it. This is not an effective way to get it done. I'll see y'all at 1 p.m.